So I'm here to talk about toys and games, and not Toy Story, don't worry. I'll start by giving you a little bit of background about me, just like why did this two worlds collide in my brain. Just as in terms of like what I do, I run a small studio in DC called Humans Who Play. We do games and toys and everything in between. And I also teach at American University's Game Lab, which is an awesome game program, and Corcoran's Interaction Design School. So that's just like my official background, but I thought I'd start with a video of one of the toys from a company I worked for almost 4 years called Little Bits. Has anybody heard of Little Bits here? Oh my god, okay, let me introduce you to Little Bits. So this is an old kit actually we made, before I joined the company. It's one of the reasons I did join. So Little Bits are these electronic building blocks. They snap together with magnets. You can make your own circuits. This is Reggie Watts. It was a pretty cool moment for us that he played with them. And this is the synth kit. We still make a music kit, but yeah, you can see it's pretty wacky. Yeah, it's not just for kids, as manifested by Reggie. I like this part. But most people might know us from these two kits, which are the last kits I worked on before starting on my own, which were collaborations with Disney. We did a Star Wars kit, which you can imagine was a really fun project to work on, and then a Marvel kit, which was even more fun. So yeah, this is Little Bits. I spent 4 years of my life basically thinking about toys. Non-traditional toys, basically, probably more on the STEM or electronic toy side, but that's like my toy background. I thought about this a lot. But before that, I was a video game designer, working in probably the least video game designy job, which was, I was a game designer at this public school in New York called Quest to Learn. Has anybody heard of that? So if you're into games and education, but like the good kind, you should definitely check it out. It's founded by a company called the Institute for Play, and Katie Salen, whose book, Rules of Play, if you're into game design, you should absolutely read. And so I spend a lot of my time in the school designing game-like kind of curriculum and games themselves, and it's always better to have the kids talk about it. So I thought that's my second video. Let's see if it works.
It's really cool school. Everyone from school quite like it. Only the design games after you challenge games. So instead of just doing
Can you guys hear it?
Well, we have the basic classes in school, but we gave them different names, like math is called Code World.
So what they're saying is like they have the same classes like school. They don't just like play video games all day, but they are framed differently as if they were video games. And this is in 2009, before like gamification and all that stuff. So keep that in mind. It was done with good intentions. And you know, a lot of the games we made looked at ARGs, and there was like a crazy like academy, like Harry Potter style, where kids would solve these mysteries and make slime, whatever. But one of my big takeaways from working as a game designer with kids so closely, like we literally had a game design studio in the school, was how much children enjoy, other than playing games, making their own games. Like they would continuously just take apart the games we were making for them and make them into their own kind of board game or video game or whatnot. So I got really interested in making like game creation tools. This is like the most wacky one probably. Like I made this backpack arcade, which is also a mini game creation tool. It's like nothing more rewarding than people just slamming on your back trying to beat a level. Not sure I would recommend it, but it was really fun, and I was really interested in like how do we get to make more cooler games and more innovative games. So this is all to say this is something I'm working on right now. It's a building set toy, pretty simple actually, quite large, that kids can use to design their own playground and their own playground games. And if you know anything about playgrounds, you might know that they're super expensive. So the idea is that we want to design something that's super affordable. We're piloting it in refugee camps in Greece and Lebanon. You can ask me more about that after the talk. But back to Toy Story. This was just to give you a bit of a background about who is this person here, standing by herself on this panel. Don't worry, it's not going to be about Toy Story, even though for the older people in the audience, this brings so many memories. But I feel like Toy Story encompasses so well what is so awesome about toys. They're objects of affection. They're objects that have a meaning to us. And I thought that I start us off by doing something interactive. You guys will have to talk to each other. So I told you you'll have to stand up. I love asking this question to people because I think it always reveals something very personal about us, about each other. And I would like you to just take a few minutes and stand up, find somebody you didn't come with to this panel, so a stranger, and ask them what their favorite toy was from their childhood and why. This is mine. I don't know if anybody here was a kid of the 80s, like me. This is what I did with my sister. We would just record cassettes of original songs in our very bad voices for probably all, I don't know, our middle school years. So yeah, take a few minutes, stand up, find somebody you don't know, and ask them this question. I bet you'll find something interesting.
All right. This hurts.
I don't know this question.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Fairly quiet, but you know, of all the things could have been quite not bad. Thank you so much. Thank you. I have a few friends here who are also interested. I want to talk to them about maybe doing a panel for next year. You know, no, only mom.
So we'll take a few more minutes and then we'll sit down again. Okay, I see very exciting conversations. I'd say we'll take a few more minutes and you guys can continue talking about your favorite childhood toys after the panel is over. So, what were some of the toys that you guys brought up?
Well, Legos came up, and we if there are things that could go on with those.
Yeah, awesome. We're going to talk about Legos a lot today.
Polly Pockets.
Yes. Oh my God, I love them. I bet like we all found something about the person we talked about that you wouldn't have otherwise found about asking them about toys. And that is because toys are just so personal to us, especially like toys from our childhood that we remember all these years later. But toys get a bad rep. They do get a bad rep, more so than video games, I would argue. They're a waste of time. They're these objects. You play with them once. Who knows if you play with them again. And I think as game designers, I definitely am at fault in that before working in toys. You know, I consider toy design this kind of like lower level design task. You know, games are complex systems. They have rules and goals and strategy and narrative. What do toys have? But that's not true. Toys actually, you know, they really aren't a waste of time. They can provide really deep, complex experiences, and they're really complicated to design and hard. Designing a toy that will grab the attention of an overstimulated child, especially a physical object, is really hard. Designing a toy that you will remember like 20 years later is almost impossible. I would argue that sometimes toy design is even harder than game design. But the truth is that toys have been in the forefront of a lot of innovation in science, in education, and things that happen in our culture. They have really formed our culture. So I thought I'll start with a few examples. Who has heard of the Banu Musa brothers, other than my students back there? So yeah, if you're like into music history, you might have heard of these crazy Iraqian brothers in the 9th century that designed all these inventions, automated inventions, wacky inventions, basically toys, like the instrument that played itself, or like this elephant that was a mechanical elephant that also played music, because why not? And they didn't do it to solve any problems in Baghdad where they lived, or I don't know, please the king or whatever. They just did it for fun. They just wanted to make toys, and while they were doing that, they were basically inventing, you know, the fundamentals of programming, of automation, of automatic engineering. Another example of, I would say, the influence of toys in culture and education is Frederick Frobel, who is the inventor of kindergarten, and Maria Montessori, who many of you might know from the Montessori system. Both of them still considered, you know, centuries later, really progressive in terms of how they reframed education to be interest-driven and child-driven. So these guys, they were thinking about education and child development, and what did they do? They designed toys. That's what they did. They made these toys, they really observed children and came up with these objects that would enhance child development. And in fact, they invented the building set category. Their first toys were building blocks, which is, we'll talk about this later, it's a super category, as we call them in the toy industry, so a category that has spanned decades and is still one of the most profitable categories in the toy industry, aka Lego. Speaking of Lego, I think even if you look at the history of Lego and Ole Christensen, he invented Lego in between wars, right? And one of his motivations was that he wanted to invent a toy that was not a war toy. And he wanted to do so because Danish people were just so depressed from the war. And he wanted to bring a toy that brings joy in people's lives. And I can't think of something more important than that. So, super categories. You haven't heard this term, we use it a lot in the toy industry. There are basically things, if you go to Amazon and look at toys like arts and crafts, building sets, action figures, dolls, things like that. But I wanted to talk about two specific super categories today, which are action figures and dolls. We will talk about Barbie. They're basically the same thing, but it's fascinating how they've been marketed so differently that sometimes we think of them as a different category, but they literally started as the same thing. And we're going to talk also about building sets. So let's start with action figures and dolls. So growing up, I see some smiles. You all maybe had some of these guys, or maybe some of these gals. Definitely the most gendered category in toys. Definitely the one that has haunted the pink and toy aisle problem for years. But it's interesting to look at the history of action figures. So the term was first coined by Hasbro in 1964 when they launched the G.I. Joe action soldier line. And what is funny, it was coined because they wanted to market it as a toy for boys, not a doll, which was for girls, because Barbie had launched a few years earlier and was dominating that. But in fact, G.I. Joe is the same height, 30 centimeters as a Barbie doll, same play pattern, you change outfits and kind of play with different poses. But it was just marketed in such a way that it was like the boys' toy. So you can blame Hasbro for everything. Why not? But the mechanic that the first when we use the term action figure for the first time with G.I. Joe was reflecting was this mechanic that has been ancient, basically, of kids playing war. And you can find that in toy soldiers, maybe that your grandfathers or great grandfathers had. The first toy soldiers were found in ancient Egyptian tombs, so it is really a truly, I feel old kind of mechanic you see in toys. And toy soldiers initially were made, out of wood, etc. But then what happened in the 60s was really the popularization of plastic. And the company that brought this is a small parenthesis about plastic, just because the majority of action figures, about 95% are made of plastic, was Fisher-Price. And can you imagine which was the toy they launched for? It was a full. The first time the full line was launched in plastic with a toy that was super successful in the 60s. Can you think of an iconic Fisher-Price toy? Really relevant today. I just thought I put it in here because I know my daughter would be like, what do you do with this? But yeah, when they first launched, it had they sold 3 million telephones in sales, which is crazy. So action figures really picked up. They picked up especially with companies like Mega, who was this small dollar store kind of toy company. And quickly they saw the potential of Marvel and DC Comics having superhero figures. These are highly collectible. Mega closed its stores in the 80s, And then, of course, a big boom happened with Kenner in 1976 with the Star Wars action figures that changed everything. There's an amazing Netflix documentary about it. You should watch it if you haven't and want to find out more about the story of Kenner and how they came to design the first Star Wars action figures. But what happened after that is there was really like a boom. Like after like the Star Wars action figures, every movie had an action figure byproduct. It just became an industry staple. And I really love like old ads of action figures. And look at this mom like playing with her. It's so realistic. It's just how it works. Nicely playing with your Masters of the Universe set. But yeah, Thundercats, the real Ghostbusters, also by Kenner. And then another kind of key point in the action figure history was Microman and this idea of having robots not being just cyborgs, but becoming living robots. And Takara in Japan obviously was the forefront on that. This was the first transforming robot. Guess who took these ideas and turned it into Transformers? Hasbro. So yeah, they took Takara's line and they licensed it 2 lines, the Microchange and the Diaclone, and Transformers, which is another historical kind of action figure toy. And this idea of, the robot that has a story and a life and not just a robot. So meanwhile, Barbie's happening. Barbie's happening since 1959. In that same Netflix series, also awesome documentary around Barbie, very interesting to watch. And there are so many things wrong with Barbie, right? Just in this slide. Barbie is all about, changing just the stereotype of like girls interested in fashion and getting married with Ken and long hair, and just jobs that are, nurse and caregiver and all these things and fashion model. But Barbie is one of the companies with the biggest longevity in the market. I mean, despite, their very, subjectable strategies maybe with competition, and the competition they've had through the years, it's pretty amazing that they are around. Most of the, aside from Hasbro, most of the other companies have kind of closed. And also, it's really impressive that how long kids play with Barbies. Girls will get a Barbie around like 3 or 4 years old and will play with them until 11 or 12-year-old. That's like amazing. And the average average American girl owns around 8 to 10 Barbies. And so we'll talk about Barbie a little bit more and like why that happens. But I think it's, despite all the things Barbie has brought to us, like Barbie game programmer, just making mansplaining mainstream. Barbie inspiring woman, Frida Kahlo without a unibrow. Anyway, and now they're like trying really hard with their careers. There is a game developer that looks like she's more on it. And the entrepreneur is my favorite. She looks like Jackie O. But we can be very cynical with Barbie, obviously. But I think, again, it's worth to mention when Ruth Handler, which is the inventor of Barbies, came up with the idea, obviously she saw a market opportunity. But one of the reasons she came up with it was that girls until that point had only baby dolls to play with. So they didn't have a doll that would reflect how they wanted to be when they were older, a woman doll. They just were like taking care of babies, very problematic also. So she wanted to kind of give them something that is older than them to look at. And children's psychologists have studied Barbie a lot. And one of the reasons they found that Barbies are so appealing is that girls often use it to develop social skills and to process social situations. The reason they play with Barbies when they're 10 is because something happened at school or they have a crush on someone and they reenact it with their Barbies. So something to kind of keep in mind. So obviously the connection with video games here is an obvious one. You can look at avatars. Also another very problematic kind of category with diversity and gender issues, but Xbox Live finally figured it out in 2018. But you can look at avatars in a very interesting way. There are parallels, but also differences. With toy, you have a pre-constructed kind of figure and character that you play with and you reflect your identity on. With an avatar, there are so many more opportunities to customize it, and that's where we see the focus on video games. We see video games focusing on, avatar and player character creation as like a tool for identity, for representation, for those types of things. But I think there are a lot of opportunities to kind of merge these two worlds, especially when you think of the physicality of toys and avatars. So if you haven't heard of Makey Lab, they made this really cool project called Makeys. They're 3D printed dolls that you can design and print, and then they interact in a video game environment. They got acquired by Disney, so I don't know what's happening with that line. But the concept was really, really interesting. I think another thing to do is if you haven't been here at the arcade, usually there's a really good display of indie toys. With the Maker Revolution, Maker Movement, there's so many cool designer indie toys that exist that I think would be amazing in indie games. Like I wish indie toy designers, who are usually industrial designers or artists with like a knack for toys, and indie game developers would just come together and make more games. So yeah, these are some of my favorite ones. 2 of them have knives. I don't know why. This is an artist in New York called Kavo Abe. She makes really cool games and toys, and there are real little mice in there. So just to sum up, like looking up why action figures were so successful and are so successful still, so many years being around, is obviously they're forms of representation, whether they're a pre-constructed character or not. We use them to represent ourselves in social situations. They are a way to really hone your social skills. They're objects of affection. You guys all talked about this while we were talking to each other about your favorite toys. This is something also we're going to talk about a bit later, but affection is not a word we hear a lot about in video games. So just some food for thought. And they exist within a universe. I think what's fascinating with action figures is they always, there is a movie, there is, maybe a comic or whatever, like they exist within a universe that surrounds them. So we talked about action figures and dolls. We're going to talk about building sets. My students know this, they're in the back. But if you live in the Washington, D.C., DMV area, the National Building Museum, fun fact, has one of the largest building set toy archives in the country. And you can write to them if you're really nice. I think they would give you a tour. We took a tour this semester and it was really wonderful. So, all of you probably have played with Legos. And this is one of my favorite ads of Lego. Before they were also victims of the pink and blue problem. But I think it encompasses so well what we all love about Lego and why they're so appealing even years later, which is this pride of building something. There's something almost instinctive, like core to us as humans, of getting joy by like physically building something and then showing it to the world or just looking at it and saying, oh, look what I built, look what I made. And the overlaps with video games are pretty obvious again with world building games, from SimCity to Minecraft. What I find fascinating is Minecraft obviously inspired by Legos, and now one of their best-selling kits. Yeah, it's all comes back. But yeah, what I wanted to just talk about maybe a little bit more is the beginnings of this, right? And we mentioned Friedrich Frobel earlier. So he, as we said, was inventor of kindergarten, and he designed these toys to kind of accompany children as they were reaching these developmental milestones. And he designed these beautiful gifts, he called them kindergarten gifts, both because they were given to children as gifts in these boxes, but also they were tools for adults to observe the gifts children have been given since their birth. And they're just so beautiful in the way they have been designed. Each box introduces a different shape. So the first box is just a sphere, And Froebel talks very practically about the sphere as like the shape that represents the world and in a very spiritual way. And then each box introduces kind of new shapes. So this is, I think, the second gift introduces, the square and the cylinder. And then as you move on, each box introduces new shapes that he was really interested in having a surprise in every of his boxes. So like when kids would open it for the first time, they would find a new type of shape that would surprise and delight them. And then of course, this is the first modular building set system, right? You can combine them all together to build incredible things. What is also worth mentioning about Froebel is that his whole system was not just about the observing all the child development milestones and the stages that children go through, especially in a young age, but also teaching them real life skills. So that was the middle of the Industrial Revolution, 1830. To me, there are so many parallels and similarities to people's obsession today with STEM skills and teaching programming to kids at the age of 1 or maybe younger. But things haven't changed that much, right? From there, you had all these different types of building sets that reflected the era of the time. Like the erector set is all about, building these electric tin, engineered kind of constructions from a Ferris wheel to like a factory machine. Quick parenthesis, this is the inventor of the erector set. So I wouldn't think that he was, but his name is Alfredo Calton Gilbert, and he was an athlete, magician, and inventor. So this is who I aspire to become one day as a toy designer. Tinker toys, still popular today, right? So more than 100 years later. Lincoln Logs. Fun fact, the inventor of Lincoln Logs was John Lloyd Wright, who was the son of Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect. And you might not, if you have kids or nieces or nephews in the audience, you probably didn't give them a Lincoln Log set this past Christmas, but you might have given them something like Magnetiles, right? Like these mechanics they keep coming up more than, obviously there's Legos, but just the new products, new toys, it's just something that kids just enjoy so much to do. And so if we summed up why this resonates so much as a category with us, there's a pride of building, there's the idea of organizing chaos. So Lego has a foundation that studies play, and they study why, for example, the mechanics of Lego resonate so much with children, and they also advocate for play being a human right. But one of the things they found was that there's something instinctively rewarding in our brain from when we take something, a pile of blocks that is completely unorganized, and turn it, build it into something. As well as they found out that children are much more likely to focus on a toy for a longer time when they're trying to master a skill and be creative than something that is kind of more easy to play with. Which of course we know in video games, that is why everybody loves to play video games, because you just keep mastering skills and becoming better at it. So some overlaps that maybe can inspire you as you think of how building sets could kind of tap into video games. I think there's obviously the overlap with world building, mechanics, and games like SimCity and Minecraft and so on. But there's something interesting about physicality, right, when you have these building sets. So one example I wanted to show was Blinks by Move38 that you guys might be familiar with if you're in the indie game scene. They launched a really successful Kickstarter last year, and there are these blocks you can program to make your own video games. And then Beast of Balance, such an awesome game. It really combines well, this physicality of a toy, of something that's a stacking, toy stacking game with a virtual world. Strongly recommended. So, we're gonna close with 2018's best-selling toys. They look all so cute. As someone that works in this industry, sometimes I look at these toys and I'm like, why? But again, I think it's actually really worth paying attention to this and looking at what makes these toys so successful, why kids go crazy about Hatchimals, which if you don't know about them, they're these eggs that die within a day. They just like hatch, the plastic breaks, and then the furry animal comes inside. And now they're Hatchimals collectibles. And fingerlings. Who here has heard of fingerlings? Yeah. Yeah, they are just, kids are just so crazy about them. There's these little animatronic monkeys that go on your finger, and there are like shows about them. And if you just, yeah, go Google them and then spend some time on their website. I'll see you tomorrow. For reals. And then of course, if you are around 8-year-olds, you know they're on YouTube all the time watching slime DIY videos. It's all the rage. So yeah, I love looking at what is popular in the toy industry and thinking always like, oh, how can you translate maybe some of these into game mechanics or video game ideas? So I thought I will leave you with 3 design challenges. You can tackle them with a person you met in the beginning of this talk while talking about your favorite games, or maybe with coffee after MAGFest is over. But yeah, here they are. So. How would you redesign or add collectible items to your favorite video game? I think this is something that video games do really badly. Like usually collectibles in video games just like are a waste of time or they make no sense within the game. But toys do it really well. Toys, like the collectibles also category in terms of like super categories is like continuously rising for the last 5 years. And I think one reason is surprise. You know, toys do surprise packs when it comes to collectibles. That's a really delightful mechanic. Come up with a bunch of game mechanics that ignite affection. We talked about toys as objects of affection. It's usually the opposite of how we talk about video games. We don't really think of affection as a game mechanic for video games. We kind of think of the opposite maybe of affection. So thinking of, what are some game mechanics that ignite affection? And of course, what game would you make out of slime? Please do let me know. That's it. Share your ideas with me. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and all the things and here. And yeah, I don't know if people have any questions. Awesome.
Are you familiar with the Anki Cosmo robot?
Yeah.
My son has that. That's a really cool educational, I guess, kind of tool.
Yep, I know them well. They were one of our Little Bits competitors.
Yeah.
They do a great job. I love them. Yeah. Yes?
Because it's the relevant thing to bring up is that in terms of the kind of crossover appeal between video games and toys, what are your thoughts on the Nintendo Labo? Is it called?
Yeah, I think that's a great example actually. I didn't bring it up, but I think that's a very interesting integration of the maker movement into the mainstream video game industry. And actually the Institute of Play, which is a non-for-profit that started Quest to Learn, has a big collaboration with them right now to bring Nintendo Labo in US schools. So I'm a big fan, yeah.
What about the Skylanders toy integration into video games? Do you like that, or you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more you see those overlaps, it's really interesting. You don't see them that much. I think this is one exception.
Because my son has, he was really into collecting those, and I kept thinking to myself, if they had these when I was a kid, I would have loved seeing a toy get sucked into a video game, play with your toy on the screen.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a brilliant idea.
Yeah, exactly. I think more of that would be awesome.
I was going to say, a similar note to that, there's the Crayola Color Alive toys, which are really, it's basically just a coloring book that you can then take a picture of on your phone, and whatever you just colored comes into a three-dimensional object on your screen.
Yeah.
I'd be fascinated in seeing it more of not just as something playing one move of animation, but as actually creating worlds in a coloring book and then playing through them.
Play-Doh has a really cool app that does that. You scan your Play-Doh and then they become creatures within your an iPad app.
I need to look into that.
Yeah, it would go well with the Crayola, I think, experience. Other questions?
Are there instances of seemingly artificially manufactured scarcity within the toy sphere. Like I know Nintendo does that a lot where they sort of know how much they have to make of something and make much less.
Yeah.
Does that come along often in toys?
I don't have experience with that, right? Because I work for a very small toy company that like was hoping they would sell out. So we had the opposite problem. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, especially when you have like characters that are highly anticipated, companies want to make those, rare items, and they're just so much more valuable to players or collectors. Yeah, yeah.
This is, well, in the example you brought up, is the micro change that became the Transformers. How weird is it to think about that the tiny little micro change Volkswagen Bug, which was just like a paint eraser, it just got a movie centered around it.
Well, I mean, I think because people saw the potential, right? Like, especially after Star Wars, they were like, oh, we have to have a movie for an action figure, and vice versa. If we have a movie, we have to have an action figure. So I think, especially with the popularity of television at the time, with kids, like that's, again, growing up in the 80s, that's what you, Saturday morning, you would wake up, put on whatever, Transformers was on, and then it was a great way to kind of integrate that into your toy line.
It's just really strange thinking about this. It was Bob Budiansky who was writing up all of the characters and stuff. He looked right at the micro change Volkswagen Bug and was like, this is going to be the kid heel breakout star.
Yeah.
If he had looked at anybody else and thought about that, just how different.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you mentioned coming up with playground equipment that can be used inexpensively and shipped to areas where it normally wouldn't be feasible.
Yep.
How do you end up balancing economy of materials, because obviously it needs to be relatively lightweight and easy to transport, with the fact that playground equipment gets worn really hard?
Oh my God, let's talk about this for an hour. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of research into materials. So we are working with a manufacturer out in Wisconsin that is building a type of hardboard actually, which is a very lightweight material, but that can be laminated and it's really, tolerates like different climates, etc. But yeah, it's a good challenge, good question. I think of it a lot.
I guess like with the way a lot of kids are getting involved with technology, do you think there needs to be kind of like an area where to separate the two? Like you're saying the building blocks on 3D, but do you think it's still important to have like hands-on building in reality versus like constantly being towards
a screen? Yeah, I mean, that's another conversation we can have for an hour, I think. I think in general, like you have to have measure with everything, right? Too much screen time, whatever, like it's not good for adults, so I'm sure it's not good for kids either. But I think there is something regarding, I mean, children, like developmentally, need to develop eye-hand coordination and dexterity. These are like core skills you develop when you're 2 and 3 years old. So I think it is very important that you do play with building sets. Even if you do stuff on your iPad, like, it's good to kind of test like how you balance objects, how you take a small object and put it on a bigger object. Montessori had this beautiful, super simple building toy called the Pink Tower. And it's really a set of different size squares. And she designed this like lessons around it, right? And the lesson of the child was like they had to eventually put, one size on top of the other. So like the bigger one is on the top and the smaller one is like a tiny one like this one. And it sounds so easy. It's so hard for kids to do. Because it requires them to focus, to understand balance, to coordinate their little hands, to put the last one on the top. So I feel like those skills are still very relevant to us as humans. So yeah, good to not overdo it either way is, I think, the golden rule.
You had mentioned like the popularity of collectible toys with like mystery aspects, like surprise toys and whatnot. What do you think about the ethics of marketing that type of thing towards children?
I know. So there's a great book called, I'll check the exact title after the panel, just make sure it's the right one. But it's called How to Market to Kids Ethically, and why kids buy, or something like that. And it talks a lot about the ethics of marketing to children. I think it's a really slippery slope, right?
Right.
Yes. Because children are so vulnerable and so easily impressed. So I don't really have an answer to that other than just, I don't know, be moral. But I think it's very interesting to look at how toys are marketing these days, their products to children. A lot of it is through YouTube influencers. So they just basically look where kids are most of the time, and then they market it through that, or they market to parents. That's another interesting distinction actually within the toy industry. Like, you design a product for children, but it's the parent who decides, right? And it's also very different if you market through an online and e-commerce kind of site, or Amazon. You're trying to get on the Amazon kind of top bestsellers, or choice or whatever, than marketing in Target in the aisle where for example they don't know where if you don't fall into one of the classic toys, they might not know where to put you in. So yeah, lots. I feel like we can talk about it if you want a lot after.
Thank you.
Not on record. Okay. See.
When talking about building sets, do you think it's more beneficial for kids to do unrestricted free play with just basic blocks, or to actually follow a schematic?
Yes. Oh my God. So Lego, when they first started, they were all about open play and creativity, and now they've kind of moved to this very structured designs that they offer, where you build a very specific thing, right? So I mean, there are pros and cons. I think from an experience point of view, like a toy experience point of view, it's good for children to look at something finished, as they understand what they have to make, and they feel very proud. If they made whatever, a spaceship or a Minecraft thing, and then they put it on their living room. That it really is one of the things kids do with Lego, especially as they get older. They will build something, and then the parents are so proud. Look what my kids build, and it's on the mantle. But of course, I mean, to me, the joy of Lego is the infinite possibilities you have, and there is so much more problem solving when you think of, okay, I want to build a cat out of Legos. How do I do that? Versus here is the cat, and you just follow the instructions and do it. So that's my personal take on it. Great. Thank you so much. These were such interesting questions. Awesome.